Hello, my friends, and welcome back to another episode. Today, we're going to talk about something that's actually a widespread issue and one of the most overlooked problems with overall gut health, hormone health, and even trouble losing weight. And that's gallbladder issues. And in addition to gallbladder issues, the unsung hero, bile, which is so important for so many aspects of our health. And gallstones themselves are one of the leading cause of hospital admissions related to GI issues. Bile has such an important role in our health, and we too often see this watch and wait and ultimately remove the gallbladder altogether that can cause so many other health problems for people, which we will get into. But let's start with the gallbladder itself. Where is the gallbladder in the first place? It sits right under your liver on the right side. Your liver makes bile, and then that bile goes into the gallbladder where it's stored. And then when the fat you've eaten enters your small intestine, it triggers something called polycystokinin, which I mentioned in the episode Digestion Begins in the Mouth. And that's a messenger that sends a message to the gallbladder to release bile. The bile is then released and starts breaking down your fats so that you can get all the nutrients out of the fat. Now, remember, we are only what we eat, digest, and absorb. So in order to really get the benefit of your food, you need to be absorbing it too. And that's where all of these things come into place, because even if you're eating the most healthy diet, if you're not absorbing it, you're not getting the benefit. So let's go back to bile. It's a digestive liquid. Think of it like a dishwasher detergent that is needed to break down the fat in order to be absorbed. And what happens here is that the bile flow can actually become sluggish and becomes like a sludge. It gums up the ducts and it reduces the effectiveness of the gallbladder emptying due to suboptimal ratios of ingredients. This can happen from things like high cholesterol, dehydration, fewer bile salts, insufficient taurine. We can also have it happen from things like dysmotility or other certain risk factors. And one of them is actually just plainly being female. Yes, just being a woman, you have more risk for gallbladder issues, particularly women over 40 that have also had children. So being a mother also increases your risk. We also need movement in order for our gallbladder to contract. And also low fiber diets can put us at risk, and so can insulin resistance, because we start to get a fatty liver potentially when we get insulin resistance. So let's take a step back and talk about where bile is made. Before it even gets to the gallbladder, it's made in the liver. And so once we start getting this fatty liver, we can see how it affects bile synthesis itself. And it can really play a huge role in the overall synthesis of bile. Another thing that can play a role in it is hypothyroidism. Individuals that have really rapid weight loss or weight gain. We can see it happen whenever we have this dramatic change in our weight. Birth control pills can be another thing. And as I said, you need taurine in order to make bile, and that requires methylation and B6. And so often when we take birth control pills, we're not absorbing the B6 that we need. So we want to start making connections in these roundabout ways that you may not even be thinking of connections, and that can actually be affecting your bile production. Cholestasis is the backup of bile flow in the liver and the biliary duct. Think of it as some type of a clog in the system. And then a stone can form, which causes the pain. And that's when people end up having to get their gallbladders removed. But it starts with the sludge. So remember, we don't want to wait to the point where we actually have the gallstones, because there's so many things you can do to help break up the sludge and get the bile flowing well again, so that you never even have to get there. It's really when we start to see that sludge form that we want to intervene before it gets where it's clogged and inefficient and you don't have the appropriate amount of bile to break down your fats. So what are some clues that you could be having issues with your gallbladder and your bile? First of all, bloating. Are you getting bloated? This can be a little tricky because sometimes bloating happens a few hours after we eat. It's not always right when you're eating your meal. So if you're getting bloated, and particularly if you're getting bloated a few hours later, you might not be getting that breakdown of fats. If you see it happening more often when you're eating fatty or greasy foods, if you feel like, oh, I don't tolerate fatty foods, or when I eat greasy foods, I feel worse, that can be another sign that it's actually a gallbladder issue. You can also get pain in the upper right quadrant of your stomach underneath your rib cage, or sometimes in the middle of your back. Sometimes mid-back pain can actually be an indicator of a gallbladder issue. You may also be burping more, especially if it's after you eat those fatty or fried foods. You may also experience dry, itchy skin because you're not digesting your fats well, or even red palms. And that could be because you're not absorbing enough fat from your diet. You also want to see how you feel after taking fat-soluble vitamins like omega-3 fatty acids or vitamin D. Sometimes even low vitamin D or vitamin A levels can be an indicator because they're fat-soluble vitamins, and you may not be absorbing that vitamin very well because you're not breaking down your fats. If you notice that after you take something like a fish oil, you feel more belching or you feel more uncomfortable, that can be another sign. You also might want to look at your stool. We often see light colored pastel stools that float, or can even have like an oily film over them. So that just may be another thing to check and see if you're considering that you may be having gallbladder issues. In functional medicine, we also do stool testing where we look at things like elastase or fecal fatty acids. And so we can really get data supporting some of these decisions to help you. So let's talk about why you should care about this, why it's important. We don't talk about this very often. I was doing a post one day and my daughter read it and she said, "Mom, no one even knows what bile is or cares." Well, that might be true, but you actually should. So that's why I want to share it with you. And it has more to do than just breaking down fats. But let's go into the fats first. So think of it like a digestive juice. It acts like a detergent to emulsify our fats that need to be broken down before we can digest them. These are things like vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin K. They're fat-soluble vitamins. Some of these vitamins are particularly important for thyroid function. So we're not actually able to absorb the vitamins and the nutrients that we think we're getting, which are affecting other functions in our body. Bile is composed of 95% water, and then it's made up of bile salts, bilirubin, fats, amino acids, proteins, enzymes, and even hormones like estrogen and toxins. Your bile actually plays a very important role in detoxification in your body. And that's another thing you really have to consider. We really need free-flowing bile to process the toxins out of our body so we can release them. And if you're not having the correct amount of bile flow, that can really impact your overall toxic load. It has a very similar effect when we talk about estrogen. When we talk about estrogen, we need to use it and lose it. We're making estrogen all the time, and then it has to go through pathways to break down. We need to, like I said, use it, then lose it. We need to have enough in our body, but we also need to break it down. And sometimes it's not about how much we're making, but it's actually about the fact that we're not able to break down our estrogen. And when we look at a hormone test, for example, the Dutch test, we're looking at how estrogen is metabolized. There's 3 phases of metabolism. You have phase 1 and phase 2 that are happening in the liver. So we want to make sure that we have good, strong liver health, and we're really being able to metabolize the estrogen. The good news is that we can always take steps once we have the data to enhance your metabolism and really get the clearance you need. And then after we metabolize in the liver, we look at stage 3, which actually happens in the gut. And that's when the bile acids conjugate with the estrogen. As we said, estrogen is part of the bile salt and it attaches, so it can be excreted through the body, and we're not getting this overload of estrogens. But when we don't have enough bile, we're not getting these levels of excretion that we need. Signs you may not be efficiently getting rid of your estrogen include menstrual migraines and headaches, mood swings, PMS, heavy periods, weight gain, bloating, acne, and fibrocystic breasts. Estrogen dominance, like I said, is not always about making too much estrogen, but sometimes you're not clearing it well. To make things more complicated, you might have a high toxic load. You may just be using up resources to excrete toxins rather than metabolize the estrogen. And the estrogen ends up recirculating and can cause estrogen dominance. So we really have to make sure that we have good bile flow to really bind to the toxins and the estrogen to pull them into the colon and really excrete them. Bile also helps regulate the pH of the chyme in your intestines and has antimicrobial properties. So if we don't have good bile flow, we can create an environment that's optimal for dysbiosis and overgrowth, something we definitely don't want to have. And that can lead to further inflammation, actually affecting the gallbladder itself. So sometimes we get in these cycles. Is it the chicken or the egg that came first when you're getting the sludgy bile? And that's causing some of these changes to happen, which can cause inflammation, which can cause further damage to the gallbladder, affecting your bile. So we really need to take a look at this and evaluate this so we don't get in this situation. Sometimes in functional medicine, we say all disease begins in the gut, because once you get dysbiosis in the gut, then you can get immune responses. You can set yourself up for autoimmunity and inflammation, and that can play a role here too. Bile can also help regulate oxalate absorption from the gut by minimizing the binding minerals and the undigested fat. And that can be really important for people who are prone to kidney stones. Oxalates can be a real problem for people that have more of a propensity for kidney stones and other issues. We could get into a whole nother topic on oxalates too, but bile does play a role there. Hypothyroidism is also likely for people who have reduced bile flow. We actually need bile to convert T4 to T3. And hypothyroidism also slows down the gallbladder's ability to move bile. So as you can see, we get in these patterns where some of these cycles start happening. And we really need to start from the root and get this solved. So let's talk about what you can do. First of all, for people who have had their gallbladder removed, you really need to think about potentially adding ox bile. Now, again, this is just for informational purposes. I don't know your overall medical health, so you really need to contact someone you're working with as a medical provider. But it is a good idea to get some ox bile if possible, because your gallbladder is a holding place. The bile is made in the liver, but our gallbladder is what holds the bile. And when we eat, we release this bolus dose of bile. We're stimulated to release bile to digest the fats, but when you don't have the gallbladder, you're not releasing it in a bolus dose. It's just sort of trickling out, and it's not in that concentrated form that we need, so you can get the optimal amount of bile to dissolve the fats that you need to at mealtime. So when you take the ox bile, it's going to actually help you dissolve your fats when you're eating. So if you have a gallbladder that's been removed, a lot of people find relief when they start getting that ox bile, because the gallbladder itself does have a function that you're losing when you no longer have it. We also want to do things that promote liver love, so we can help clean that sludge out with things like D-limonene, taurine, milk thistle, curcumin, choline. We want to increase emptying of the gallbladder with polyphenols like extra virgin olive oil, artichoke, and even digestive bitters. Hydration is another great thing that's so simple. I'm always going back to hydration, but good hydration is particularly important because 95% of our bile is water. So if you're not getting what you need to make good bile, then you're putting your gallbladder under pressure, which can happen when you're not drinking enough water. Also doing things like cutting out processed carbohydrates, staying away from meats that aren't organic, and really bringing down your overall toxic load can be very helpful. I hope this has given you some good information about bile and why it really is so important for our digestion, for fat absorption, for hormone health, for our toxic load, for insulin regulation, hypothyroidism, and so many more things. And it's really important to start looking at this before you're at the point where you could possibly have gallstones. So always look into the root cause. If you're having bloating, pain, undigested food in your stools, if you're having some of these symptoms, you want to start looking into it and figuring out what's going on. And don't eliminate bile as a possibility. Hope you have a great day.